Globish. It's a book by Robert McCrum, who no one will have heard of, but he was the literary editor of The Guardian in like the 2000s and 2010, 11. I think this was published in 2010. Okay. And it's about the history of the English language. And, you know, he finishes up with, calls it Globish because he says here how the English language became the world's language. And it is slightly triumphal and a bit patronizing and a bit elitist, I have to say. And that's why I read it, because I was like, when I bought it, I was in the throes of dealing with Oxford and that crap. And I'd worked with The Guardian, you know, so I knew them. And so, but there's interesting stuff in here, like, you know, because it's all kind of linked to the global economy and the impact of English on the global economy. And this goes back to me saying to you and other people, you know, and this is why this podcast is called Exploding the Myth of ELT. Like a little bit here. In the short term, 1989, which was the fall of the wall, inspired a boom that was more than just a peace dividend. In the next 2 decades, 1990 to 2008, the global economy would grow from 23 trillion to 54 trillion dollars, and global trade would increase 133%. About half this global growth came from emerging markets. So the more global capitalism boomed, the more English developed as its preferred medium of communication, contagious, adaptable, populist, and subversive, but not so subversive if it's run by Oxford and Cambridge. So I love these people. I don't know if he went to Oxford. We could Wikipedia him, you know, but they all did at that level in the Guardian. They're all part of the establishment. You know, that's why they all piled into Corbyn, you know. But it's all about, you know, the power of English and here, global culture and economics, the English language and global banking began to achieve some remarkable transformations. So like putting global banking in the same sentence as the English language, right, in terms of growth and economics, tells you everything you need to know, which is what I told you about in the first one, about, you know, the director of the British Council's overseas English language teaching centres saying, oh yeah, we price it just by finding the most expensive and doubling it. You know,
yeah,
it's an economic project. The English language is an economic project, and like, if you want to keep making money out of it, you don't want people to learn to speak it, do you? You don't want to make autonomous learners, because that would knacker your market. So there you go. I will shut up now. What are we talking about?
Yeah, well, kind of puts the lid on it in a way.
What? Puts
Well,
the lid on. Well,
I mean, that's it. That's the end of it in a way. But I mean, on what can I say, on a personal level, like personal people trying to learn English, I think many people are not aware of that.
They're not. Well, they just think it's English. It's like, you know, they know they need. It's like everyone in Southeast Asia, you know, in those Facebook groups trying to practice their English. Why you know, ask yourself, why do they want to speak English? Because it will improve their economic situation, because they'll get a better job, because then they can get a job with a multinational company.
Yeah.
And they get more money, and that improves their family life. It's like Van. I don't know if you remember the video, probably don't. My last conversation with Van, my Vietnamese student, I said, Van, has it improved your life in any way, being able to speak English without thinking? And she went, oh yeah, because she bought beauty products
Mm-hmm.
from a company in Thailand, and they obviously were selling internationally and they spoke English,
Mm-hmm.
and she didn't speak English very well. And she told in the video a story about she phoned the company and spoke to the guy she'd spoken to last time to order some stock. And he went, "Wow, what happened? You're speaking English." And she went, "Yeah, you know." And she said they had a great chat.
Amazing.
And that was amazing to capture that
Mm.
in a conversation with a learner, because that in a microcosm is what this guy's going on about. It's like the focus on, that's great that Van has improved her business and her life and her family's prospects through English. But now she doesn't need to buy another course. Because at the end of working with people, and I usually say, so do you think you can do this on your own now? And they all go, yeah. They know that they know the routine. It's a process. You and me, our job is to guide them in the process using the materials that gets them to understand how they actually acquire the ability to speak English or a second language, because it will work with any language. But the difference between you and me using EOT and OUP or CUP or Pearson or whoever is they don't want you to stop buying the books.
Right.
Because that's the economic necessity for them.
Mm.
And their, system, or whoever, it's like what would happen if I know for a fact, because I looked it all up when I was dealing with them in a rather difficult way, that Oxford University Press every year on average turns over about £330 million just in the sale of English course books.
Mm.
And that's been going on since time began, since the 40s and 50s, when the first course books started coming out, say the 50s, 60s. That's 330 million quid a year. Oxford University Press supports the university and so it pays a lot of money. That's its role, is to pay money to the university. But the university, since time began, has been criticised for being elitist and packed with public school boys and girls, right? And most of our prime ministers have come from Oxford, and so we have this circularity in terms of the UK and power and systems. So the English language and the profits from it over the last 40 years via OUP have funded the maintenance of the status quo in this country. That is at the core of this book, Globish, it's at the core of the British Council. It's all about soft power, as they will freely admit. And it's about a post-colonial cash cow maintaining the status quo. And no one can argue against that. It would be madness to try to say it isn't. So what would happen, going back to the question, what would happen if Oxford University Press and Cambridge University Press and Pearson and all of these guys went, hey, do you know what? We've got this course. You do 10 lessons and you don't need another course. You can speak English. What would happen Would they do it? And like in my dealings with Oxford University Press, when I sent an FOI to see what they've been saying about me behind the scenes in emails, right? One of the comments from some executive to another executive when they were going, oh, no, we can't do this, like, la, 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 la. Oh, how do you tell him he's too street? Right? Too street. So actually something that works, that's about human interpersonal communication, like we were going to talk about personalisation, right? Saying something's too street, if you flip it, and there's more stuff in the stuff that I read and all this kind of stuff, it's like, in the rejection of EOT was like, well, like our materials are designed, for the classroom, blah, 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 blah. So the opposite of street is classroom.
Mm-hmm.
So what they were saying basically, despite lifting some of the key bits, which is what really pissed me off, is that they had to maintain the status quo of putting 20 to 30 people in a classroom with one teacher at the front and pretending that would help them speak.
Mm. The same approach is used even when you reduce the numbers and you have small groups and even one-to-ones. It's exactly the same idea as having a big class.
Yeah.
Which is totally ineffective and useless.
I did a table years ago. I don't know where it is on one of the websites. And basically, I had this thing. It's like the time, like, so we know practice is important and appropriate practice is crucial and preparation for practice is important. But if you think about it, I was like, okay, like, well, think of ratios, right? Speaking time with someone who's a fluent speaker. So in a conventional, in a secondary school, it's 1 to 30 in a 45, 50-minute lesson. So how much time does each individual student in that class get to speak with the teacher? And then the only reason like small groups and one-to-one improve on 1 to 30 is because there's more time to speak. So if you teach someone how to practice and turn it around, and then like someone who's doing our thing like EOT, talks to me, and then I encourage them to talk to one or two other people using the same language and recording it. Do you see what I'm saying? The ratio is completely flipped in terms of comprehensible input, in terms of on the page, scaffolding, and then using, and the amount of useful data coming back to the student or learner's brain about their ability to speak and where they're making mistakes is exponentially increased compared to someone sitting in a classroom for 5 years in secondary school who never learns to speak a language. So and it's all driven by the method and the modus, which is the primary objective is to make money. And it has to be books going into 30 books going into a classroom makes more money than one PDF showing someone how to practice properly.
Yes.
It's kind of mad. I rest my case.
Well, yeah. Well, one of the things I was thinking about before we started talking this morning was how, in fact, the idea of having conversation in order to increase your English is becoming more and more fashionable. People like that. The idea that now when I start saying that my sessions are conversation based, just to start with, explain, they like that. More and more people like that. And they say, oh, yeah, that's happening a lot, but it's not happening properly and effectively.
No, it's not.
I can see the difference very clearly. And that's why I'm really comfortable using this method, because I know how it works, and that afterwards it's difficult for a lot of people here to find other people to do the sessions with in the same way they do it with me. I mean, you talk about saying, okay, I know what to do now, I can do that with other people. Here it's not so simple, because you have to find those people.
Yeah.
And it's really, like they're busy, they don't have time to look, and etc., etc. But many of them use English for work, and so once they have acquired a level of confidence and where they do feel comfortable in their work situation, then they're not going to lose that. They're going to just increase their English naturally, because they're using it every day for communications with their partners or colleagues or bosses or whoever. And that's once you got it, you got it. So it's great. Doesn't have to go on forever at all, and you can always learn more by on your own anyway, if you're interested in learning more vocabulary in other fields. That's what you want.
I know lots of learners I've worked with who, like I had the group Give Your English out there, and that was to recruit volunteer fluent English speakers to pair with learners. And I just did that because it was a resource I was trying to build, and it worked for years. In some respects, it's always sketchy. It's never you don't just find someone like that. You can do, but a lot of the students I've worked with have found people in there or on their own back online, going on websites where you can meet pen pals and stuff like that. Or practice partners. There are language exchange websites.
Yeah.
And when they find one or two people and they practice with them and they get beyond the initial and become friends, boom, they're in there. That's and part of the process, I think I mentioned it before, of becoming friends, i.e. the social glue around that regular contact, is like in any human relationship, trust. So the trust has to be built, and I think that most learners, like we discussed before, who just instinctively think they can just practice without preparation, they're violating any trust that's put in them by someone who's trying to be friendly and helpful by sharing their ability to speak English. They're violating the trust by not preparing, because they're destined to bore the crap out of the person as they repeat the same structures of language and vocab. So there will be no progression, and there will be nothing interesting to discuss once they've done the weather and whether they're married or not, and whether they have children. So the trust is, and once people, this is the thing, is once you have some materials that give you something interesting to talk about, that you're capable of talking about, then that's more interesting for the person who's lending you their English speaking ability.
Yeah.
And then you improve, and then it becomes a virtuous cycle. And once you get the virtuous wheel spinning, you're in. That's it. And everyone I know who's gone on and kept going, it's like they've always had one or two people who they're mates who are English speakers, who they found online or they met at work, like you said. I mean, it just makes sense to do that and to have something interesting to talk about.
Yeah.
And every time, like you sent me a message going, well, let's talk about personalization. I mean, like personalization, I find personalization hilarious in some respects. Because You know, like I love it. I love it when teachers and educators, and like, you know, I've been involved in ELT, private education. I've been a governor at a primary school, chair of governors, blah 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 blah. Oh, like people in education talking about personalization, right? They don't know the first thing about personalization, right? It's like they don't understand that, like, especially in ELT, like having a conversation with someone one to one, an English speaker and an English learner, in which you start sharing aspects of each other's lives and experiences as part of the conversation, is inherently personalized.
Yeah.
You don't have to work at it. You and me having a chat now is personalized. And I'm saying stuff and you're smiling and you're thinking, oh, he's pushing it there, or like that's a bit controversial, you know. But that's memorable
Huh?
because I'm stimulating your brain and your emotion. And emotion, whether it's sad or happy or shocking or whatever, attaches to words, language, sounds, meaning. And that's personalization.
It brings the whole thing alive.
Yes, it aids memory, it aids recall. 30 people sitting in a room listening to a teacher tell them everything's been personalized for them is complete horseshit. It's complete rubbish. You know,
Mm.
they might have a little element by, you know, walking around the room and going around, well, you could try doing it this way, you know, or what about doing it that way? You know, that's personalization, like, or giving them how many teachers in the current educational system, especially in the UK, have the time or the inclination to give every single student slightly different tasks to do? They don't. It doesn't work like that. But the differentiation in the task becomes, it occurs in the doing of the task. And if everyone's doing the same task, i.e., with the same person, it doesn't become terribly personalized. It's all about ratios, back to ratios. So it's like personalization is a mad thing. I also have a long-standing bugbear about people in education biffing on about lifelong learning. Seriously, shall I share my thoughts on lifelong learning and educators going on about? It's like this buzzword. It's like buzzword bingo. Oh yeah, lifelong learning. We practice lifelong learning, and you go like, okay, well, I just sent you something. I need you to have a look at it. Can you? Oh, how did you send it to me? Yeah, I'm rubbish with technology. And like that was a chair of governors to me, right? And I went, well,
What?
hang
What?
on.
What are you?
You're meant to be extolling the virtues of lifelong learning, but you can't be asked learning how to use technology in a world that's
Yeah.
technology's growing at an exponential rate. Therefore, I consider you to be a dereliction of your duty. And she looked at me like I was an alien, you know? It's like, ah. So there you go. So what else are we gonna? What do you? I'm looking at where you. Yeah, I liked your comment about think of the long lists of irregular verbs and endless lists divided into groups of phrasal verbs. Some adults, some people, adults still try and learn them. I like that phrase. Kids can do it if they have to, but they mix up the lines. Yeah. Become and begin, for example. There's no connection between the words and their meaning. There isn't, is there? There's no connection between the words and the meaning. And the meaning is, and the comprehension of the meaning is the most important thing.
Mm.
So, like, I mean, did you Is this like this echoes to me like Judy's
No, this
stuff?
is my experience with
Yeah,
children and adults. This is
right.
my work experience. It's mine.
So I
And
mean, like,
that's
because
real.
I will avoid irregular talk of irregular verbs at all costs. You know.
I mean, I've learnt most of the list myself from the kids.
Yeah.
I know about cut and put. I learnt that.
They taught you.
Yeah, yeah. I'm very impressed. Oh, and the latest, not the latest, but one of the other ones that I find really confusing is the list of which you've got, which I know is totally
Yeah.
valid. The list of adjectives and the order they go in.
Yeah.
For me, obviously, as an native English speaker, it's instinctive, but
Yeah.
I've had to learn it, and I have a really bad memory, so I just never remember the order. I have to check it every time.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean that's okay because it makes sense and it makes it sound good. So when it sounds good, they don't have to check the list anymore, and
Exactly.
you just know, you feel it.
But that's the beauty of language, isn't it? Because having fun with language is like putting things out of whack
Mm.
often, isn't it? You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's if you deliberately change the order of the adjectives, it sounds really weird,
Yeah,
but it can have a completely different meaning.
yeah.
I mean, there's loads of memes online, isn't there, where I once saw one the other day, like sort of like signs that are meant to say one thing but actually say the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
And what was it? It was about something about alligators. There was a
Yeah,
sign,
yeah.
and yeah,
That
if it,
I mean, when they realize that there's something wrong, they stop, and
mm,
it's like you can see a whole picture in a film happening in their heads,
yeah,
and it's great.
and that's when you learn.
Mm,
That's what I call the aha moment.
yeah, and you need
Is
a situation where that can happen. You need the relaxed and
yeah,
trusting situation where you know you're not going to be judged, and you
yeah,
know
yeah,
that the other person is has either, like in my case, I've been through the same thing, and I still do go through the same thing with Italian.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's it's completely different from traditional teaching, completely.
It is because and that's why it's more memorable to be. I mean, it goes back to correction. It's like
Mm.
um, I remember playing the audio of me talking to Jane, the Chinese girl, back in 2010,
Mm-hmm.
to a mate of mine who's a journalist. Or he listened to it online. He sent me a message because he heard me talking to her or with her, and she was mispronouncing something,
Mm-hmm.
and I went, sorry, can you say that again? Sorry. And then when she got it right, I went, oh yeah, you got it. And he sent me a message kind of alleging I was chatting her up or being, flirting.
Mm-hmm.
And what I was doing was giving her the aha moment. I was giving her the reward
Yeah.
that would be memorable and boosting her emotional reaction to successfully pronouncing it.
Mm.
And I've always thought that was, oh God, that's weird. What does that says more about you than me? You know,
Mm.
kind of a strange thing, a really strange thing. And this is why I've always found psychology really interesting. I did some psychology at university in my first year, failed it, had to resit. But and pass the second time, obviously, because no one fails. Uh, and so psychology is fascinating, the way people perceive stuff. It's like with my kids. I always someone goes, "Oh, that's like that." You go, "Wow, is it? Is that really how it is?" And there's all this kind of absolutism about stuff. And I can take that back to the absolutism about education. This is what we do. This is how you learn. No. Have I told you the story about? I probably haven't. Like, am I allowed another story?
Oh yeah.
Am I? Right. Okay. So when I became chair of governors of a primary school, my kids' primary school, I became chair of governors purely by default because no one else would do it. And I said, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it my way, and you're going to have to do what I tell you. And they went, yeah, okay.
They didn't know what they were in for.
They didn't know what the fuck they were going to get, right? And in a year, I had the whole thing zero paper, from massive folders and papers and photocopying and printing and like all of this stuff. I had them all using Google Plus on their phones and organizing the whole thing digitally, and then got like fiber into the school, new devices, state of the art industrial Wi-Fi, because it bugged the crap out of me that the Wi-Fi didn't work. And and that stood him in good stead for the pandemic a few years later, because they were the only school in Weymouth that was ready with Google Apps and industrial Wi-Fi. And like when I became chair of governors, I was told you have to go on this course for chair of governors. I was like, okay. So I ended up, I had to go to a massive country mansion down the road, and with all these other chair of governors and some guy giving this course, and he was billed as he was a super head and a super governor, because they give these like nomenclatures, these super things, for people who are higher up the ladder. And he started the whole thing in this room with all these people. He started the whole thing with, does anyone here know how you actually learn? Because I can tell you now, most teachers they don't know how people really learn. They're not taught it in teacher training, and no one in a school knows how someone really learns. Does anyone here know how we really learn? And there was deathly silence, right? And I went, yeah. And his face went, fuck, right? And he went, oh yeah, so how do you think we learn? And I just went through how we learn, right? Cognitive markers, emotion, sight, smell, sound, connected to meaning, connected to sounds and words, blah, 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 passing into long-term memory, la, 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 through repetition, blah, 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 and context, blah, 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 lowering. Did the whole thing on learning. And his face was thunder, because I just trashed his whole thing, right? And that's probably because I'm autistic, that I thought, well, he wants the answer, doesn't he? It's like, and everyone was looking at me like, oh God, you just trashed his whole thing. And it was kind of mad. And we did the whole thing, right? And right at the end, it did the old, everyone split into groups. Here's a big chart, a big pen, you can draw, you're working on it and your ideas and that, and then we're going to share them. And right at the end, we put all the groups flip chart things on the floor, these big things that we'd all written on, and everyone stood around, and he was going, yes, that's very good, that's very, and I whipped my phone out and went right, and took photos of him. And he put his hand up and went, no photos. And I was like, what? And when everyone was going away at the end, I walked up to him when he was putting his laptop away at the end. And I said, "Oh, hello." I said, "That thing with the photos at the end, right?" I said, "I hope you realize you just stamped all over the way I actually learn. Thank you. Bye-bye." It's like unbelievable. And that's what we have to deal with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I was wondering about this question of no photos. It's like it's confidential for some reason. I mean, I don't understand what's confidential about it.
Nothing.
Nothing.
It's about control.
About power. Yeah.
It's about power. It's
Yeah.
about control and power. And you see it all the time with educators. You know, this is the whole performance thing. Like teachers historically, right up until now, probably less so now because they spray out links, but teachers still like to be the conduit of knowledge.
Yeah.
So to be the expert, to have control over the content, and
Right.
that content was his. He was saying, "This is my content because it's been created in my classroom." And he had a big ego because he was a super head and a super governor.
He wanted to keep it all for himself for some reason.
Exactly.
Yeah. Which
You know,
is,
but it wasn't his to control, but he wanted to control it. And he also wanted to stop someone using technology in an appropriate way to take an aid memoir, something that would help me remember or process what had been discussed. So, you know, I was just using the phone as an extra bank of memory.
Right.
That I could refer back to. But he didn't want me to do that, which was stamping on my own autonomy as a learner. Which is the complete opposite of what he was meant to be fucking talking about.
Right.
So don't get me started. Like, do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? It's kind of, but this is endemic everywhere.
Yeah, but it's also, for me, it's interesting just because I take it to my own situation where I'm working with people who are all different, and they all have different ways of thinking that they learn. Maybe they're wrong, some of them. Maybe they don't actually learn effectively the way they think they do, but they have to be respected because that's what they want. And if you impose a different way, they feel uncomfortable and don't respond and don't.
Are you not talking about? Are you talking about learning styles?
Well, you know, people who think that there's no way that they're going to be able to get to a high level if their grammar isn't perfect, for example.
Yeah. The grammar bashing thing, yeah.
Yeah, or just different ideas that people have about what they need. People think they know what they need.
Yeah.
And so that you know,
but that's conditioning.
Yeah, but in order to be able to help them, you have to kind of be flexible and bend a little bit this way and a little bit that way, and it's a path of, again, personalized. Absolutely, very, very, very much so. To see from day to day, every time we meet, what direction to take and how to make the most of the time we have together, so that it's positive and effective and pleasant as well.
Yeah, I'm probably less focused on the pleasant.
Well, you're not, in a way, because when you talk about being friends, to be able to, I mean, I had a session with a woman yesterday about fitness.
Yeah.
It was really good because we were talking about things that are enjoyable.
Yeah.
And good for us. That was, and we were very open about it on a personal level.
Yeah.
And it was pleasant, definitely.
Yeah. Well, that's sharing, trading information, personal information is part of the glue, the process of
Yeah.
becoming friends, isn't it? And being comfortable speaking. You know?
Yeah. And
But
sharing.
I meant when I'm less focused on pleasure, it's like, you know, my conversation with Peter from Tanzania when he turned up in hadn't done his prep, and I gave him a bollocking and told him to go away and come back again when he'd actually done some work, and then it worked. But you know, like I mentioned, learning styles. Like there's been a thing over many years about learning styles. You know, are you a visual learner or you know, a kinetic learner and stuff like that. But it was exploded. That was exploded years ago. But people kept doing it, talking about learning styles. And I always say to people, we all learn a language the same way.
Right.
You know, our brains are we're different in terms of how we grew up, how that's influenced our brains, our personality, you know, stuff like that. So there's this combination of genetics and environment, but basically our brains all acquired our first language the same way, and we'll acquire our second language the same way, which is pretty much like the first language.
Mm.
You know, so all of the, I think I totally take your point about, you know, it's making it a nice conversation and that building that's important. Yeah, absolutely. But when people, it's like lots of these learners, you know, they think they know how they're going to acquire language, but they don't.